The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Feitelberg.
You got it. How you doing?
You're comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California. And Jerry, you are a member of the Comfortably Zoned Network team. And I'm going to use you as kind of an example of what we're trying to do as we get into the second phase of Comfortably Zoned. As many of you know, I have agreed in principle to a radio deal with Sports Byline USA. And the show is going to be called Comfortably Zoned in a Vat of Pine Tar. And great baseball name. Peter Golenbach is the co-host along with Lenny Randall. And we're going to have features from the Comfortably Zoned family, Comfortably Zoned podcast family. As an example, Skip Lockwood and Mark Littell are going to have a closer's corner.
Nice.
Al Clark, the former American League umpire, is going to have an umpire's corner. We're going to have an author's corner hosted by Ian Kahanowitz of our network. And he is going to interview the authors on our network, such as David Nemec, Peter Golenbach himself. Just off the top of my head, Mark Littell is an author. And Skip Lockwood's an author. Hal Bach of the Associated Press is a member of our network, and he's written many books. Why are the authors failing me? Who else is with us that is authored? Well written. It'll come to me in a minute, but we're in the final stages of production. Advertising is being secured, and very exciting. Jerry, you yourself will be among a number of people from the network, such as Michael Duca, Wayne Unger, Robert Denninger, Jack DeGraw, Marty Rose, and George Case. Those guys, you guys are going to have a segment where you bring us up to date regionally on the baseball season in progress. So the show is designed to look back on baseball history, look to the present, what's going on, and through Lenny Randall and his youth program, we're going to follow kids on their way up, so that we're covering it all in the spirit of looking back on the great baseball history, examining what's going on now, and looking to the future, involving children, boys and girls getting involved in baseball in all aspects. Getting back to the segments, we have a broadcasting baseball history with Tony D'Angelo, who he's going to do a segment on that. George Case and David Hubler. David Hubler being one of the authors who will be involved in the roundtable. We'll be doing a show on wartime baseball and the significance of it, and the crossing of the line between when Jackie Robinson took over. We're going to have a segment, the history of that. Peter Trunk and Ronnie Rabinovich, who is a lifelong friend of Jackie Robinson and carries on his legacy. He speaks all over the country about just the He speaks about the Jackie and his trials. He was a boyhood friend of Jackie. Jackie came to his 10th birthday party when he was playing with the Brooklyn Dodgers. So, and they had a lifetime friendship. And Ronnie has spent his lifetime keeping the legacy of Jackie alive. He and Peter are going to have a segment on Jackie. So we've got more in the hopper, but we've got a great show, and you're going to be part of it, Jerry. You're going to give us regional coverage, you and Michael Duca on the West Coast, what's going on in the National and American League East. So I wanted to thank you for being part of it and get your reaction, how you're feeling, anything you want to say.
Oh, I think the whole thing is an exciting concept. And baseball had such a rich tradition. It's unlike any other sport because we can go back and talk about the great teams way back in the early days of baseball, up the live ball era, starting with Babe Ruth, and all the eras that they had, the great Yankee teams, the great Red Sox teams, the great Dodger teams, the great Giant teams, anything you want to talk about. Of course, the new teams, the expansion teams. There's just so much going on in baseball. We can talk for days and days and days about it. And I just think it's a very exciting concept, and I'm just so thrilled to be a part of it.
Oh, well, we're thrilled to have you. You've been a friend of what I call a friend of the network for an awful long time. I wanted to, before we close this, Jerry, I wanted to mention a few of the authors that are going to be part of the Author's Corner, who have been part of Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And one is David Finoli, who has written many books. Another one, Bill Cashadas from Philadelphia. He's well written, and Ian himself is working on his first book, is publishing his first book or having it published. So a lot of what we're doing is paying homage to those of you guys out there listening that have brought the game to life for the fans, the journalists, the authors that bring it to us, bring us the game, behind the scenes game. So I'm real excited about this, and again, I want to thank you. This show, what I've done, this offering, Howie Gordon, another friend of this show, who is an author, and he's a very eclectic guy. He's a former porn star, and he is also a former Playmate of the month for Playmate magazine way back in the day. And he's one of those who made a success out of the industry, writes about it, and he is on a non-sports show on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network entitled Two Jews, Three Opinions. Well, Howie read on his last offering, read us a wonderful story that he wrote and submitted to Sports Illustrated, Frank DeFord. And I screwed it up technically, or it didn't record technically, this, that, or the other thing. It was on last week's podcast with him, but I'm going to re-put it on this podcast. So it's not, we get record of it, and enjoy it, everybody. It's really interesting. The story of youth baseball that he wrote, and he has such a beautiful radio voice, and he's so personable that you'll enjoy that. And let me tell you that Jerry has a podcast show, co-hosts a show on this network, the A Show, athletics, past, present, and future. Co-hosts it with the aforementioned, or is it forementioned, Nancy Finley. So look for that on a weekly basis, and I'll keep you posted on my podcast, which you're listening to right now, as how the radio production is going. I'm thrilled to be doing it, and thrilled to have people like yourself, Jerry, to associate with. Thank you again.
Yeah, it has to be an exciting time, not only for you, but for me and for, I'm sure, for people like Peter Trunk and Ron Rabinowitz and Wayne Unger. It's really good that we could get an opportunity to talk about the things that we see and things that we remember. And we all have how many millions of baseball stories are out there. And to share them with people and to have all this excitement going on.
Well, I've accumulated or brought together a bunch of real passionate baseball-loving people, and it comes from passion. And speaking of which, my passion is kind of getting books to kids, so that if you enjoy what we're doing on this show, on any of the shows, on Jerry's show, the network, the radio, do me a biggie, do me a big solid. Box up some lightly used children's books and take them to the Head Start program wherever you live. Kids need to read. They need to get their noses out of the computer games and the devices. They need to develop an imagination. And most of all, really, they need to become school ready, which means being able to read themselves and communicate and have some semblance of math. If they can do that going into kindergarten, they'll never fall behind. But if they do fall behind, they'll be catching up all their lives. So Head Start is for kids who need a head start. And for one reason or another, socialism has not been the vogue of the flavor of the month of this country for a while, because people are afraid of sharing, afraid that it'll take something away from themselves. Well, here's something you can do that takes nothing away from anybody. Bring those books. Have a campaign. Do what it takes to get as many books to these programs as possible. Head Start is wonderful. So I implore you to do that. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, I agree with you 150% on that.
Well, your math scares me, and you're a former pharmacist. So, is this why all these years that I've been buying drugs from you, I'm so screwed up?
Of course.
Of course, that's right. Oh, Jerry, I found something out. I won't say. You were the pharmacist of the year in California. What was it, 1995?
1995.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just want you to know, there's an expression we have in Yiddish. It's called kvelling, Kvell. You kvel over your grandkids, the pride. I'm kvelling, Jerry, for you and for the network. Jerry was the team pharmacist for the A's back in the 90s and has been in the media in the Bay Area ever since. And it's really good to have you.
Yeah, I started listening to baseball as a young kid Of course, you and I have a little bit of mileage on us. But when I was a kid, I listened to the game on radio. I used to love radio. I used to listen to the radio all the time. Radio, as the late Fred Allen used to say, radio was theater of the mind, and television is theater of the mindless.
Very well put.
One of the things that young minds can do is to get a book. And if you have a book and you love to read, you're never alone. And it's really a wonderful thing to encourage the kids to start reading and to expand their minds, to expand their imagination. And I can't support you enough on the drive to get the books into the hands of children. Beautiful,
Jerry. Thank you so much. If you're listening, please stay tuned. We'll be back in a second with Howie Rose and his terrific story. Adios, everybody. It's been so heartwarming, Jerry. Nice.
Okay.
Be well, my friend.
All right. Talk to you later.
Adios, everybody.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
A Baseball Story by Howie Gordon. I was born 2 blocks from the old Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I wore Pirates diapers. There was never any doubt that one day I was going to grow up to play Major League Baseball for the hometown heroes. When I came of Little League age, I was drafted by the Cubs. We couldn't have a Pirates team in our Little League because all the kids were going to grow up one day to play for the Pirates. It would have made all the non-Pirates completely crazy. We were the sons of the men who worked in the steel mills and the businesses around them. We took our baseball very seriously. For the boys in the neighborhood, it seemed like adult life offered a choice between the major leagues or working in the steel mills. We learned early how to hit the cutoff man. I was not blessed with the best of bodies. I was the fat kid. I had the largest breasts in the 7th grade. But it didn't matter. Fat guys could play baseball. There were ample precedents. The world champion 1960 Pirates had themselves a rotund catcher named Smokey Burgess and a portly pitcher named Bob Friend. They were my role models. Hell, Babe Ruth, perhaps the greatest baseball player of all time, was a total blimp. And hey, I knew I could play the game. Like every other kid in Pittsburgh, I dreamed of being the sleek Roberto Clemente. But Smokey Burgess was a lot more like it. Hell, I was just happy to be in the game. Not surprisingly, I was also a catcher. Catching was the position reserved for the fat kid. So was the tuba in the band, playing center in football, and fat kids could just forget about basketball altogether. So I became the Cubs catcher. We had a couple of good teams. In my second year, we came up 1 game short of the championship series. Unfortunately, I lost that playoff game for my team in the bottom of the last inning against the Giants when I made an error, trying to pick Dickie Rizzo off at third base. It was a shame. I had him picked off, too. You know, some kids at 12 look like men. Their sexual hormones have already kicked in, and they begin thinking about girls as well as baseball. Sleek, handsome Dickie Rizzo already had the gold chains around his neck and the dark hint of the mustache on his upper lip. I hated him. I watched him prancing and dancing around third base, and I seethed. The score was tied. If we could hold them, it meant extra innings. The Giants, however, sensed the kill. Their bench was up and screaming. I could tell that our pitcher was sweating bullets. A catcher knew these things. Dickie Rizzo danced off third base. I mean way off third base. While he taunted our pitcher, who had just missed the strike zone, I snapped a throw down to third base. I was going to pick off that slick dude and get us out of trouble. Oh, forget about it. The ball sailed 10 feet over our third baseman's head, and Dickie Rizzo came waltzing home laughing. I couldn't even block him at home plate. There was no throw. He was mobbed by his teammates. It was a long, long winter. In my junior year, we bounced back to win the whole thing. We had a flamethrower named Junior Kennedy, and we rode his arm to the series victory. I used to wear a sponge in my catcher's mitt to dull the pain of his fastball. I became an all-star catcher that year. My hitting was pretty good, and my defense had improved, but my mouth was awesome. I could talk. My manager told me to keep up a constant chatter behind home plate and do my best to distract the hitter. What license! I would say anything. It was like doing squat down comedy. I'd make fun of the shape of a batter's head. I'd talk about his grades, his girlfriends, even his mother, anything. Half of the time, I didn't know what was going to come out of my mouth. Umpires frequently stopped the game, took me aside, and warned me to tone it down or else get thrown out. And it was important not to piss off the wrong kind of kid, too. If I thought a guy was really dangerous, or if the umpire was about to throw me out, I'd keep the chatter to baseball and take my chances. I developed a pretty good sense of what I could get away with and what I couldn't. The opposing pitchers would occasionally throw at me, but then I'd get first base. Happily, my teammates protected me the few times opposing players hung around after a game to make me pay for my mouth. It was all part of the game. We had a great year. We won it all. My senior year should have been even more spectacular, but it all came crashing down around this time of the year. Spring training with an early injury. Oddly enough, I was pitching. Pitching was far and away the glory position of Little League Baseball. Everybody wanted to pitch, even fat little kids who had spent the last 2 years catching. And every senior was given a chance to pitch because 12-year-olds could just throw the ball harder. That's all there was to it. I pitched against the Phils. I was doing all right, too. I hit a home run that day off George Zach. It was the only home run I ever hit in organized baseball. When the game went into extra innings, our manager told me that it was my game to win or lose. We won it. I've forgotten most of the details, but I'll never forget that I pitched all of the 9 or 10 innings it took to win. I had a fastball, and I threw it every single pitch of every single inning all that day. And as a result, for the next 2 years, I could not raise my arm above my shoulder without serious pain. We didn't know from rotator cuffs back then. The doctor said I had just thrown out my arm. The treatment was rest. I was unable to make an overhand throw back to the pitcher from behind home plate. The Cubs tried to play me at first base for the rest of the year. I could still hit a little, but my power was gone. I hit some singles. I even stole a base once when a wild pitch got caught in the backstop, and the catcher couldn't pull it out. But you know, I was damaged goods. I never really felt like a part of the team after that. Playing first base was a personal nightmare. I couldn't catch a ground ball with that first baseman's glove to save my soul. I did not understand the first baseman's glove. It was all over. I just didn't know it. When the next spring came around, I sat out my first year of eligibility for the Pony League. It broke my heart. But I just couldn't play. I never considered retirement, though. The injury was just another obstacle to overcome on my way to the big leagues. A year later, I thought I was ready to give it another shot. I could throw the ball back to the pitcher, and I could even make a throw to second base if I didn't have to do it too many times in one game. But my pitching days were clearly over. The Browns drafted me as a backup catcher to play in the Pony League. Our first-string catcher was a guy named Fran. He was bigger, tougher, meaner, and much better than me. He was the league's all-star catcher. At 15, he had a mug like a pug and was already playing fullback for his high school football team. His face was a masked scowl that gave the impression his father had just beaten him. You never wanted to get in his way. I wasn't ever going to take his place. Never. Still, the Browns needed a second-string catcher in case Fran had to miss a game or in case Fran wanted to pitch. Hell, I was just happy to be back in baseball. I had made another team. During spring training, I occasionally caught during practice and rode the bench during the exhibition games. We didn't have much of a team. We had 2 big-time players, Fran and a pitcher named Phil Axelrod, who grew up to write sports for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We didn't win too many ball games. It soon became evident that I wasn't really ready to throw a baseball yet. After a hopeful beginning, my arm condition deteriorated rapidly. The manager wasn't very sympathetic. He needed a second-string catcher, and I'm making underhanded throws back to the pitcher in practice. He hinted that he was getting ready to cut me from the roster. It was late April. It was still cold and wet in Pittsburgh. I had to skip a Thursday practice because my arm was still throbbing from the last Tuesday's practice. That night, I got a call from our manager. When I heard his voice, I expected the axe to fall. It didn't. In fact, he told me that Fran Lafferty had to be out of town for Saturday's game. He wanted to know if I'd be able to be his starting catcher. Whoa! The team needed me to play. He said it. He said it. Oh, what delicious words. After dinner's ready and I love you and the checks in the mail, they still remain among life's finest. I told him I would play. That night, I came down with some kind of bug, virus. It had been circulating in my family for a while and it had finally caught up with me. There was a fever and chill, headache and diarrhea. I spent the entire next day in bed. My mother didn't want me to play on Saturday. She was worried about my health. But Ma, I always called her Ma. I wanted to be Italian. The team needs me, I told her. She belittled this sentiment, and regrettably I belittled her. Like I said, I had a big mouth. It became one of our many wait till your father gets home episodes. As it turned out, my dad wasn't too hard on me. After all, I was sick. When Saturday dawned, however, my fever had abated, and I managed to convince them both I was well enough to play baseball. They let me go. It was an away game in the middle of nowhere. We met at our home field in caravan to Timbuktu in the cars of our coaches. We arrived at another one of those dirt fields blackened with oil that were so popular in Pittsburgh. Instead of having to care for the grass, they just oiled the dirt. I suppose they provided less maintenance and fewer rainouts, but they were yucky to play on. Still, they were better to slide on than the asphalt ones. During the pregame infield practice, I had an urgent call from Mother Nature. Despite a disapproving look from our manager, I got the backup second baseman to take my place and excused myself hurriedly. Alas, when I got to the men's room, it was padlocked shut. Oh, my God. This was no time to be squeamish. I rushed to the ladies' room. It was also padlocked shut. Jesus! In Pittsburgh, summer began the day after Memorial Day. Until that day, every restroom and every water fountain in every municipal park was shut down for the winter. You know how you jump around when you have to really go? Well, that's what I was doing. Oh, Lord. I spotted some woods and made my way there pronto. Now, I was never much of an outdoorsy kind of person. I mean, my family didn't do a lot of camping or anything like that. But the plane was on fire, and I needed a place to land. You remember number 1 and number 2, and how there was occasionally a number 3? Well, this was a number 3. I found myself a secluded spot in the woods and hunkered down to relieve the pressure. I did my best to keep my underwear and pants out of the way. Nature ran its course. But my relief was short-lived. I had no toilet paper. It was a tough choice, but I decided on one of my T-shirts. I wiped and then buried it under some loose dirt and leaves. I made it back just in time to take my place standing on the foul line while the umpire was playing the national anthem on a portable tape recorder. It was gray and wet and cloudy, and there were no fans at all in the empty bleachers. For the land of the free and the home of the brave. The game began. I have no memory of balls and strikes, hits and runs, errors, or anything like that. I couldn't tell you who was pitching or even how I did at the plate. I don't even remember who won. All I can tell you, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, what happened is that around the second inning, I lunged to catch a fastball from our pitcher, and that was it. Involuntary goosh. The sudden movement had brought a blast from my bowels. Gee whiz. There was nothing I could do about it. Absolutely nothing. It was a no backseat situation. So I got back into my crouch behind home plate. Time kind of slowed down. Midway through the next hitter, I could feel the umpire behind me. I could sense his discomfort. I sat there in my crouch as he started to sniff. Sniffed the umpire, and he didn't have a cold. Inquiring noses wanted to know. I grew uncharacteristically quiet behind the plate. He called a timeout and looked at the bottom of his shoes. There was nothing there. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I had more than just passed gas. Me and the good Lord above both knew that I had just pooped my pants. And I did not particularly want to have to tell that to the umpire. This was a season ticket to therapy. If I could avoid it, I did not want to have to tell the umpire what had just happened. The umpire was still looking around. He asked me to show him the bottoms of my cleats. Hey, no problem. I showed them to him right away. There was nothing there. He made the batter show him his feet. There was nothing there either. He took a look around. He was not happy, but he resumed the game. When we finally got out of that inning, I ran back to my spot in the woods. I removed my soiled underpants, and while I was there, made a fresh deposit. I started to wipe myself with some leaves and panicked in mid-stroke. I was afraid of poison ivy. I finished with one of my socks. The seat of my uniform pants was already well coated with that oily dirt from the field. My accident blended in well, but there was little I could do about that fragrant aroma. I cleaned the pants as best I could and returned to the game. I went back to the woods often in the remaining innings. I had no choice. Each time I returned to the field with one less article of clothing. If it had been an extra inning game, I'd have probably come to bat naked in a pair of spikes. By the end of the game, I had used 2 T-shirts, a sweatshirt, 2 pairs of socks, and the team's towel as toilet paper. Forget my underpants. They had suffered a direct hit. I don't think the umpire ever did figure it out. He just kept sniffing, looking around, and settling back down into his crouch behind me. Poor bastard. I think it's the only time in my life I ever felt sorry for an umpire. It bothers me that I can't remember if we won or lost that game. I do remember riding home with some of the guys in a coach's car. I sat in the back seat with the window open by myself. It was cold. Nobody sat very close to me, and all the other windows were kept open too. Not much was said. Soon afterward, I turned in what was left of my uniform. I hung them up. Not a word was said about my missing pair of socks. If anybody ever had a shittier ending to their baseball career, I don't want to think about it. 30 years later, I sent this story to Frank DeFord. He had just quit Sports Illustrated, and he was starting up a new magazine called The National. I was submitting this story to try to sell it and get my writing career going. Frank DeFord wrote me a personal note. He said, "Dear Howard Gordon, thank you for your nice letter. I'm afraid, however, that I can't give you much encouragement with your story. The subject is just too unattractive to be unappealing. Sorry, but number 2 isn't anybody's idea of number 1. With all good wishes, Frank DeFord."
What a rejection letter, and what a phrase well turned by Frank DeFord. You got to feel good about that, if nothing else.
Oh, that gave just great meaning to the whole experience that somebody out there read it and could appreciate, I'm sure, the moment. And yes, I agree that it is quite distasteful, but you know, it's quite human. And,
it's part of life. It's part of life. And
there it is.
I gotta say, to a baseball fan, it's poetry.
Thank you. Thank you. I died for everybody else's sins. It was a genuinely spiritual moment there.
And you're not the first Jew boy to have done that.
I heard that rumor.
Okay. Thank you, sir. It's been a good episode. I enjoy your company as usual. The show is 2 Jews, 3 Opinions. It's Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko. Howie Gordon. Love you, Howie. Great show.
Thank you, sir.
All right. We'll talk again real soon. Be well.
Okay. You too.
Adios.
Bye-bye.